If you've gone all in on prefab and now you're starting to look at where am I getting my material from, because they're buying the piping from someplace and the steel from someplace, you're starting to get some really interesting visibility on what is the risks of these prefab modules. Do you see potentially an owner being able to one day have way better insight into their supply chain? Because a lot of times, and COVID kind of exposed this, you buy stuff, you think it's just going to show up in happy days, and then it doesn't, and you're like, ouch.
That's a one indicator of production progress for our clients. Traditionally, you see that, okay, this product has been assembled to this area, what percent of complete that is, right? And it can vary. Oh, it's halfway done, it's almost done, right? But in terms of the materials, you have a BOM, which is the build material. What percent of the BOM has been used? Oh, it's been like 50% been used.
Yes!
Okay, you're like halfway done, which is actually very, very true. That approximation is very true to the point where like owners would want that visibility, and then if they're paying for materials in the contract, they'll just release more money for more materials if they can get that report. How much of the material have you used of the product?
Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction and Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah, and I'm a planning and scheduling manager for Intel.
I'm Andrew. I'm one of the co-founders of Offsite.
Today, Andrew is on the hot seat, and we are talking about prefabrication. Here at Beyond Deadlines, we love to give you tactics and strategies that you can implement on a day-to-day basis. The construction industry is drastically changing its approach and shifting more to prefabrication and pre-construction, so I feel like this episode would fit perfectly in for our topics. The topic today and the challenge for Andrew. Andrew, you've been brought in to set up a prefabrication program. How do you do it?
Yeah, so for our clients that are kind of in the early stage of prefab, that's kind of one of the challenges, right? Is like they may be on a big project. It makes sense to do prefab for that project, but how do you get started? How do you figure out the right mentality and process to kind of go into it? And part of that is the planning process, right? So how do you think about, okay, I got to build these 1,000 panels over the next 2-3 years for this project. How do you plan it out? How do I staff for it? How do you buy materials, right? So what does that look like? So in how our clients kind of think about it, and kind of what I try to help them to do is, when I go to at the factory, there's probably a few major variables you got to really consider, right? First variable is labor, right? That's going to be the most expensive, right? And to how you manage it. If you manage it poorly, it becomes on you. There's no saving it from like an owner perspective and stuff like that. Material is a little bit more forgiving, right? Because market dynamics can change. So the owner will be like, yeah, we'll just pay for the extra rise in materials. That's fine. But labor is essentially up to you to kind of manage, right? So for a successful factory, essentially planning out your labor, how you plan to hire, how you plan to ramp your hiring, and then how you think about materials. Do you want to hold the inventory at some point? Do you want to not hold any inventory and use it within a certain turnover period? And then also the third part would be like logistical costs that people don't really think about, but they should. In terms of like, now you built in the factory, what is the cost to get it shipped and installed in a timely manner where you're not overspending?
Yeah, that's perfect as a kind of a setting the stage on a high level, and you hit on quite a few things that probably need to be planned, tracked, and managed, right? So let's kind of take that overarching hypothetical and get even a little bit more specific. Let's say this is a general contractor who is building, let's say, a data center, and they're going to a third party prefabrication facility for, let's say, electrical generator skids or something like that, right? And they want to set up planning and tracking of everything you just mentioned. Let's say, they got lots of runway, plenty of time to work with. How would you advise them to do that?
Yeah, so essentially what they'll need to do is essentially build out a forecast. So essentially a production schedule, let's say you're building these 150 skids, and some of these have subcomponents. So they ideally we need to model out not only the skids, but also how they're going to assemble the subs, when those essentially merge in with the main product, right? So what that production schedule would more or less look like, right? And that would be considered maybe like the initial phase, like phase one, right? Of
Yeah.
the project.
So maybe saying it a different way would be phase one would be, here's when we kind of need the skids on site and when they
Yeah.
need to be integrated in. And then backing off that roughly, here's the timeline where we feel like we got to complete that design packages, design sets, and get that. Okay. Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah. So the initial phase, and the initial phase of what I call design, that could take a while, right? That could be a
Yeah.
scenario where like you want to do iterations with your some cases engineering firm that you hire, your like architectural firm, based on like what exactly you're building. And once that all gets approved, you essentially would go through, and this is very specific to prefab, go to like a prototyping phase where you build some samples, and then you have them like, okay, in full scale production, we'll run these issues because we built one or two prototypes, and I can see it having problems, right? So that prototyping is also pretty critical because once you're in production, you just don't have the time to kind of go back and like iterate and stuff like that. That's kind of what kills production in some aspects in terms of
Yeah.
delays and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Is
Well,
not
and so when they build these prototypes, at the
Mhm.
fabrication facilities, they build a couple skids, you go look at the different variations. I'm guessing there's probably a lot of quality checks and integration checks and things like that, which are interesting for a different crowd. But for the planning and scheduling crowd that's listening, would this be an opportunity where you would also start to look at how are we going to manage those 100 that are going to be built in the facility? Because this is a different game. This is manufacturing, not in field construction. So would you also start to spin up some of that tracking that you're going to be thinking about?
Yeah. So it actually goes on to in terms of like how mature the manufacturer is, right? In some aspects, like if you've been doing this for a couple of years, you yourself have iterated a lot, right? And for some of these electrical subcontractors, they may even have a prefab division already that they've used and
Yeah.
iterated on.
I'm going to keep you on the hot seat, and let's say they don't, and they're
Okay.
not mature. They
Okay.
got a couple spreadsheets and a couple clipboard. You always go to the fabrication facility, and there's like a clipboard hanging up with a pen, and they're marking something, and you go
Yeah.
check the date, and it's like a bathroom at a festival. It hasn't been checked in like 6 months, right?
Yeah.
What walk me through that scenario? Like, how would you, maybe you're the owner of the GC, and you can direct them how you want them to ideally set up. What would that look like?
Yeah, so if I was the owner in GC, and we speak to owners like all the time in terms of what visibility they need, because as a software company, we essentially would provide that. But in some aspects, they would want entire forecast in terms of I want to know when each product would be start, when it should be finished, and when it should be in some cases shipped to the job site for installation field work, right? And they probably want that for all the products based on the GC in terms of what they're working on. They may want to phase it out. We're like, hey, out of the 100, I need 20 by this date. I need the next 20 by this date, next 20 by this date. Because maybe they're building it by sections, by floors, whatever it ends up being. So that coordination needs to happen with the GC for sure. And then once you kind of have the visibility, you got to plan out how you want to build it so it kind of matches that overarching schedule.
Yeah. So then what are you requesting from the fabrication facility that you're going to need to track some of those items we mentioned earlier? We talked about some labor, we talked about some material, but kind of really dive into the weeds there because seems like it's heavily dependent on the model. And then most schedules that are built aren't in the field aren't always directly tied to the model. So that's again where we're going to have some differences in styles and capabilities. But yeah, like really get in there on like what you'd be requesting them from them, like a specifically.
Yeah. So as like a GCN owner, you would want for each product, so you give a list of 100 products. I'll probably need the start date, probably need the end date, the ship date, and then based on the type of subcontractor it is, let's say if you're very big, you probably also do the on-site install too. So if you do that, then that schedule. If that is another electrical prefab like company or electrical system contractor, then you coordinate with that person. But that will be the minimum what you would need.
Go to the maximum. Give
The
me like
maximum,
I'm a psychopath owner, and I am not only trying to make sure these products are delivered on time. And folks, just so you know, when we say products, we mean the skid. We mean the piece of equipment and the thing around it. Just I wanted to highlight so you don't get confused with what we're talking about. We say the product, we just mean the end box with the components in it. But yeah, go to the nth degree here where I'm an owner and I want to know two things specifically. I want to know, one, is this project going to be on time? So what data and things are we setting up? But then also, I want to improve my manufacturing process over time. And I have a suspicion I'm going to need more than just the start and end date to go do that. So talk a little bit about that.
yeah. So kind of what that would end up being is beyond that, because to make sure things are on schedule, one of the things they also request is quality checklists and verification, right? That things are assembled correctly. Because if they're not, there's a lot of rework that need to happen, and that delays the schedule substantially, right? So probably if you want to go to the nth degree, it'll probably be each product needs to have an attached quality checklist or traveler with photo verification of it being completed, ideally with timestamps, right? And then
And does that break down to I guess I'm just pushing my mind in like a factory. Does that get all the way down to like the end process? Like I'm building a skid, breaking it down into steps. Is that what you're kind of talking about? Like I'm in step one and I've like attached the frame to this thing. Is that kind of where you're going with it?
yeah, I mean, so it kind of depends on how detailed they want to go.
I want to
Typically,
go. I want to
yeah,
go
you want to
detailed.
go, then like the lighter area, it will be like I want full verification of every process you mapped out. Like, so I'm gonna
Gotcha.
assemble the skid. It's 10 processes. Okay, it's 10 processes. Give me a photo of each process being completed. Right. That's like
Yeah.
to the nth degree. And then for every product, if it's like I just want the full verification that it's good once you ship out, then they want one checklist with some photos called a final assembly checklist
Mm-hmm.
for each product, and then and they get one, which is much shorter, much compressed. That could be
Yeah.
like 10 pages compared to the other one could be like 50, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Well, and then what about the data that goes along with it? Like have you seen clients that are requesting what are the like the highest hour tasks within creating these products? What is where the most defects are found? I mean, if you're just kind of if you're really getting down into the weeds, or do you see clients looking at this as a manufacturing process in which they're trying to turn those dials and make these processes efficient? And then kind of where are they looking at it in that respect?
I mean, for the manufacturer, yes, that will be kind of what they want to do over the long term. If they want to
Mm-hmm.
actively invest in prefab, they want to keep this facility that they rented for this project over the next couple of years because they believe there's a lot of business coming in this area, and they'll essentially just do that level themselves. From the owner perspective, they don't particularly want to go to that level. They just want to know that you're building high quality products, and they want to trust you. Ideally, right? That you're going to do it. Maybe they want some level of verification just for their peace of mind. But that's why you're going to make sure these subs that you kind of hire, especially if they're like early stage first time, you want to handhold them a little bit. If they have needs level of verification, ultimately, if they kind of are scaled up, becomes less like.
Interesting. Yeah, I would think that more people would be into that. Maybe I'm just a crazy data nut. But, I'm just thinking of your major data center programs, your Amazons, your Facebooks, your Googles, your Microsofts. They're all transitioning to a prefab world. And, we talked earlier about you're waiting for the engineering process. I mean, a lot of engineering plays into how complex or how simple those skids and manufacturing processes are. And then if you're relying on that equipment to build your site, you know, I would like as an owner just be going wild and looking for any solution possible to really get all the data I could from that prefabrication process to then improve, you know, however it goes, right? And
Yeah.
so that's interesting that, you know, potentially you're not quite seeing that from your angle yet. And I mean, do you see that something that potentially we'll see in the next couple of years, or do you think more owners are
Oh
getting
yeah.
into that game?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because you said you're doing project-based manufacturing, right? So you're not like producing the same car part every time. So the
Mm-hmm.
complexity does cause problems, right? Especially
Yeah.
like if you're building very bespoke products that are very stress tested in some aspects, right? So owners in some cases who don't get this visibility, they'll just go to the factory like
Yeah.
on a weekly basis. Like they'll send someone to drive there and watch over them like every Monday, just and get live updates if you don't provide it to them. So you know they're very hands on, especially if something goes wrong. If like,
Yeah.
hey, by the way, this is delayed a month, they're like, a month. What happened? Like that's kind of where it causes problems. And a lack of transparency can kind of break trust from that perspective, right? So having more transparency for sure is much better.
Yeah, completely agreed. Switching gears just a little bit, you know, one of the big things on the planning and scheduling side, it's integrating that prefabrication schedule with a construction schedule, right? So you have whatever they have on the prefabrication side, it's 99% usually not Primavera P6, and you're going into a prefabrication schedule. You know, at the highest level, right, you just have like a milestone that says like generator arrives on this date. They have a generator that arrives on that date. I mean, do you see anything or do you have any angles on like how that would actually be improved? Because that is a very lagging indicator. You know, this milestone moves, it pushes that milestone, right? It doesn't really like have a good, what I'll call like symbiosis. Do you
Yep.
think on your side where that symbiosis improves?
Yes, I mean that's one of the biggest problems. That's what's happening now, right?
Yeah.
No one really has a great solution for it right now. I think it could be bridged with software in the long run, right? Because software that's used on the prefab side can link with the software that's used on the GC side, and the
Yeah.
schedules can essentially sync up in real time, ideally, and you get that. We haven't really seen people do it that well per se right now. The ones that we do see do well is ones that are more like vertically integrated. So
Hmm.
some GCs that have like self-perform groups, they're a little bit
Yeah.
more coordinated because it's the same company. They have
Yeah.
tools that they kind of can overlap in. So we've seen people go that direction, but I think the answer is software over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of software, talk to me a little bit about Offsite. Give me the high level overview because this is a solution that is super interesting in the prefabrication space. And just from what I'm seeing, I'm not seeing a ton of solutions there. So talk to me a little bit about Offsite.
Yeah. So I've been in prefab modular for a little over 11 years. Started off as doing consulting with big industrial manufacturers like Schneider Electric. They were doing project-based manufacturing in the data center space as well, and they were all on paper, right? So they had this problem where their owners wanted more visibility, and exactly what Offsite essentially solves. So after doing that for 6 years and implementing some ERP systems that didn't really work, we started Offsite because we believe there's a lot of valuable data that's not being captured very well on the factory floor that could actually benefit the entire like factory overall and make them kind of get better over time to make it more efficient, right? So we launched Offsite to track production, to do quality reporting. We also expanded to track materials, labor tracking, and the latest module that we kind of rolled out was our planning and forecasting module that would help pre-con and estimators kind of figure out how to make more projects prefab or make the prefab more efficient.
Right. So let's just, you know, walk through maybe a previous example to tee it up for people. So you have a project, you want to do prefab. This software lives with the prefabrication facility, or does this project file software live at the GC? Who kind of owns and operates, you know, what you
It,
offer?
it would it'll be the factory, yeah. So like a
Okay.
pre-con estimator at the factory level.
Okay, perfect. And then what's setup like? Walk me through that. How do you get set up and get rolling?
Yeah, so essentially what we'll do is we provide templates to make it easier because prefabricated products can vary widely. You can be doing precast concrete, you can be doing panels, you can do pods, right? So during the onboarding process, we'll have like a walkthrough in terms of kind of walk me through a sample project. How much labor do you need? How much materials? What was the time frame like? Did it meet your expectations? And then after that, after the conversation, we would essentially provide you a few templates that essentially modeled out a previous project that you did, so you can have a reference point. And from there, you can iterate and kind of build more of these models, and that will allow you to kind of bid on more projects. It'll be relevant to kind of your capacity you have now in your factory. So that's kind of the idea. Would be we enable the factory themselves to kind of promote themselves, right? And
Right.
this is how we do it. This is what we provide. It's how fast we can do it. And in theory, prefab is faster and cheaper. That's the promotion that's been happening this whole time. But how can you prove that, right? Can you prove it
Yeah.
to me in a certain level? But yeah, I can prove it to you because I can say I'm going to hire these people. These are the materials I'm going to use. It's the cost of the labor and these materials. It's the schedule that I kind of want to run. I'll be done by this and this date. And here's the Gantt view of
Gotcha.
delivery.
Yeah. And then from an owner's side, let's say just an owner stepped in and then mandated their supply chain to use offsite. What do you see as the value stream um, that they get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, in that aspect, they would probably want visibility into that Gantt view and maybe like periodic updates in terms of how the delivery is going, right? So the fact that we kind of track everything from production to materials to labor, you can kind of say, okay, this is on track, right? Is that this process right now should deliver in 2 days? It kind of actual versus plan is on track. I can see it in a visualized way. Okay, good, right? We're good this week, right? So the idea would
Yeah.
be if you're not, okay, then we got to change things around or whatever it would be. Maybe the change order that comes in that kind of like makes them change their product for some reason, and that can cause delays. You can kind of see how that would impact the schedule. So that's all important, right? It's just kind of the coordination and visibility you can provide.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like that oftentimes there's a black box on that side of the side of the fence where, as I mentioned earlier, you have a spreadsheet and some clipboards you don't really know, and equipment and modules and prefabricated pieces have become such key parts of projects that most often a lot of them cause day for day slips on projects. Essentially like this piece of equipment's late, it's just going to push the schedule day for day. Any strategies that I'll say, any technology that you're super excited for in this space, that aren't there quite yet, whether it's an offsite or something maybe you're just seeing we bring in, and whether it's visual based progress tracking for prefabrication or advanced modeling or those connections you talk about. When you kind of look out of the landscape in the next 5 years, what's kind of exciting you, in the prefabrication tracking planning space?
Yeah, so kind of what I see is going to be, and I think for a lot of prefab, we're still in the early days, right? Like you can see like $1 billion project that comes up, maybe 5% of that project is prefabricated, maybe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you go prefab, there's risk, and does the project executive want to have that risk? They'll decide. I think that 5% can easily jump to 10, 15, 20% easily, right? Because based on the project
Yeah.
you're building for that project. So in order to kind of de-risk, like how can you do it, right? And I think it's going to be on the planning and actual scheduling software side of it. I think if you can actually build out a very transparent schedule that can be linked to different types of prefabbers, and that coordination links up to the master schedule the GC is running, that will essentially provide a lot of peace of mind, right? Because for the on-site is very like, oh, I'm going to build this in this phase, in this phase. They can see it being built. They can see the progress day to day because it's on-site, right? So the visual aspects of they can visit the job site. You're not going to visit, 15 different prefab factories in like a 50-mile
Hey,
radius. Just
you
not.
can't get to platinum status at Marriott if you don't go travel and visit the sites, right? You
No,
got to get that free Wi-Fi and the bottles of water when you check in somehow, right, folks?
yeah. Yeah, so that's the idea, right? Like, so you can see the progress live on the job site. You just go to the job site, but if it's all
Yeah.
prefabricated, like, did we do anything this week? Like, I don't know. I don't really know, right? Because I'm assuming they're all working and coordinating on their own. So having that level of coordination is faster. It's faster if you can get it right because you can build foundation and build products at the same time, and then you can ship it there and install. So you can run parallel tracks that would be linear in a lot of onsite builds.
Yeah, and I also see, kind of following on your thought and just thinking about, the Toyota way, as you start to, branch out into that supply chain and figure out different sorts of, like, hey, what is constraining you to actually, like, if you've gone all in on prefab and now you're starting to look at, where am I getting my material from? Because they're buying, the piping from someplace and the steel from someplace. You're starting to get some really interesting visibility on what is the risks of these prefab modules. Now, those same risks exist if you went and stick built it, because it's roughly the same material, but those get much more lost in the sauce of a stick built facility. So, I mean, do you see potentially an owner being able to eventually one day have like way better insight into their supply chain, like, going like deep, right? Like into
Mhm.
levels they probably don't? Because a lot of times, and COVID kind of exposed this, you buy stuff, you think it's just going to show up in happy days, and then it doesn't. And you're like, ouch.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the one indicator of production progress for our clients. Like traditionally, you see that okay, this product has been assembled to this area. What percent of complete that is, right? And it can vary. Oh, it's halfway done. It's almost done, right? But in terms of the materials, you have a BOM, which is the build material. What percent of the BOM has been used? Oh, it's been like 50% been used. Okay, you're like halfway done, which is actually very, very true. That approximation is very true to the point where like owners would want that visibility, and then if they're paying for materials in the contract, they'll just release more money for more materials if they can get that report. Like, how much
Yeah.
of the material have you used of the product? Like, is
Are people going far enough into saying, and again, I'm a data psychopath, this may not be a relevant question, but I almost view it as like, are they going as far as saying like that actual materials are in the facility? You know, like
well, the actual material has been used and is now like, and this is maybe a very materials term, but like
yeah,
it's in like the whip. It's in like work in
yeah,
process, right? It goes like, what is your whip right now,
hmm
essentially, and
yeah,
then how much of that is like finished goods? Like, where are you? And then if they pay for materials, they want that report, and then they release more money for more materials. But if you haven't used any of
yeah,
the materials, they're like, what's happening
yeah,
here,
yeah,
right? Like, what's
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is a planning and scheduling show. So I don't care anything about money or how much it costs or what we have to pay. I'm just always concerned about whether it's on time or not.
yeah,
Those cost accountants and QSs will figure out how far we are over budget. We like to keep this show short and sweet, so people can go about their days. Any final thoughts, Andrew, that you'd like to leave us with? We'll include all the links for offsite, and Andrew, if you're interested in it, you can reach out and schedule a meeting with them and find more out about their company and their product. I'd highly recommend, if you're in the prefabrication space, super interesting. Definitely go give it a look. But before we jump, Andrew, anything you want to leave the crowd with?
yeah. I would say is 2024 going to 2025, right? Prefab is only going to increase in popularity, right? In terms of like the benefits of it, given where we are in terms of the labor markets, it's definitely not going away. So for big, subcontractors, they're gonna be looking at this over the next couple of years, um, and love to kind of talk to them. Love to kind of talk to them what they're thinking, how they're thinking about prefab in that aspect. So if prefab increases from 5 to 20%, I think everyone wins. I think things just get more efficient.
Yeah. And if I've learned anything in my 15 years, you may not want to try and homebrew this one, folks. Hiring software engineers and building your software creates its own challenges and own issues. Well, folks, that's us for this week. Hope you enjoyed the show. Have a great week, and we'll see you on the next one.